The sound of a hand striking flesh is louder than you think, especially at 35,000 feet inside the hushed, velvet-lined cabin of an Airbus A350. When Captain Douglas Sterling, a man with 30 years of flight hours and an ego to match, raised his hand against the young black woman in seat 1A, he thought he was disciplining an unruly, non-revenue passenger who had stolen a seat. He thought he was restoring order. He didn't know that the hoodie she wore cost more than his monthly mortgage. He didn't know that with a single phone call she could ground his entire fleet. And he certainly didn't know that the woman he just slapped was Jordan Banks, the silent majority shareholder of the very airline he was flying. This is the story of how arrogance crashed and burned before the landing gear even touched the tarmac. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of overpriced coffee and the frantic energy of holiday travelers. But for Jordan Banks, it was just another Tuesday. She pulled the hood of her oversized charcoal gray cashmere pullover further down her forehead, shielding her eyes from the fluorescent glare. At 26, Jordan didn't look like a titan of industry. With her natural hair pulled back into a messy bun, no makeup, and a pair of worn-in sneakers, she looked like a college student heading home for break, or as the staff at Vista Airways seemed to think someone who was lost. Jordan approached the dedicated first-class check-in counter. The red carpet was empty, a stark contrast to the snaking lines of economy. She adjusted her backpack, feeling the weight of her laptop, a device that contained the acquisition papers for a $1.2 billion logistics merger she had closed 3 hours ago. Behind the counter stood a woman whose name tag read Patricia. She was typing furiously, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. When Jordan stopped in front of the desk, Patricia didn't look up. Economy check-in is kiosks only down the hall to the left, Patricia said, her voice flat, her eyes still glued to her screen. I'm not flying economy, Jordan said, her voice calm. She placed her passport on the high counter. Checking in for flight 8A2 to London Heathrow. Patricia finally stopped typing. She looked at the passport, then up at Jordan, and then back down at the passport. A small, tight frown formed between her brows. She didn't pick up the document immediately. Instead, she sighed a sound of performative exhaustion, as if dealing with Jordan was a massive inconvenience to her day. Miss Patricia, said, her tone dripping with condescension. This is the first-class line. If you're looking for an upgrade, or if you're standing by on a buddy pass, you need to wait at the gate. This counter is for full-fare paying customers. Jordan didn't blink. I know how airports work, Patricia. Scan the passport. The directness of the command seemed to startle the agent. Reluctantly, Patricia snatched the passport and swiped it through the reader, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to triumphantly announce an error. The computer beeped. Patricia's eyes widened. She stared at the screen, blinking rapidly. Passenger Banks, Jordan. Status invitation only. Global services. Seat 1A. The screen was flashing a specific code, VIP, do not displace. It was a tag usually reserved for heads of state or A-list celebrities. Patricia's face flushed a mottled red. She looked at Jordan, really looked at her this time, searching for the designer logos or the flashing jewelry that usually accompanied this status. She found none. Patricia stammered. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a confused resentment. I need to verify your payment method. The system is flagging a high-value transaction. It wasn't flagging anything. Jordan knew it. Patricia was fishing. She couldn't reconcile the hoodie with the black Amex Centurion card on file. "The card ending in 9009 is on file," Jordan said, checking her watch. "And you have 2 minutes to print my boarding pass before I call your station manager, David Halloway, and ask him why his staff is delaying a board member." Patricia froze at the name. She quickly printed the pass, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it over. She didn't say, "Have a nice flight." She just looked away, unable to meet Jordan's eyes. Jordan took the ticket and walked towards security. She was used to this. In the high-stakes world of venture capital and aviation holdings, being invisible was her superpower. She was the silent in Silent Partner. But today her patience was thinner than usual. She had just buried her grandfather, the man who started the empire she now ran, and she was tired. She didn't know that on the other side of security, the man who would test her last nerve was already sitting in the cockpit, checking the weather radar and complaining about the coffee. Captain Douglas Sterling was a man who believed the world operated on a strict hierarchy with him at the very top. At 55, he had the silver hair, the square jaw, and the deep, commanding voice that passengers found soothing. He was the face of Vista Airways, literally. He had been on the billboards 3 years ago. Inside the cockpit of the massive Airbus A350, Douglas was unhappy. "They loaded the wrong catering again," he barked at the first officer, a younger man named Kenji, who was frantically trying to input the flight plan. "I specifically asked for the sparkling water from Italy, not this domestic swill. And where is the lead flight attendant?" "She's doing the pre-flight check, Captain," Kenji said, not looking up. Douglas unbuckled and stood up, smoothing his uniform. "I'll handle it. The standards on this airline have been slipping since the merger. It's like they'll let anyone work here now, or fly here." He stepped out of the cockpit and into the galley just as boarding began. The lead flight attendant, a sharp-featured woman named Veronica, who had flown with Douglas for a decade and shared his disdain for the riff-raff, was organizing the champagne flutes. "Veronica, the catering is garbage," Douglas said, leaning against the bulkhead. "Tell me about it." She rolled her eyes. "And look at the manifest. First class is full, but half of them look like they used miles. We have a Banks in 1A. No honorific. Probably some rapper's kid or a tech lottery winner." Douglas glanced toward the boarding door. Passengers were filtering in. He saw a businessman in a suit acceptable. An older couple with Louis Vuitton luggage acceptable. Then he saw Jordan. She walked in with her backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones around her neck. She paused at the door, glancing at her boarding pass. Douglas watched her. He didn't see the owner of Apex Capital. He saw a distraction. He saw someone who didn't belong in his sanctuary. "Ticket, please," Veronica said, stepping in front of Jordan, blocking the aisle to 1A. Her tone wasn't asking. It was demanding. Jordan held up the pass. 1A. Veronica looked at the pass, then at Douglas. They shared a look, a micro-expression of shared judgment. "Are you sure you're in the right line, sweetie?" Douglas said. His voice was loud, projecting into the cabin. Several passengers turned to look. "Economy is through the second aisle past the galley. You'll find more overhead space there for..." "That much luggage." He pointed at her standard-sized backpack. Jordan looked up at the captain. She saw the 4 stripes on his shoulder epaulets. She knew exactly who he was. Captain Douglas Sterling, highest-paid pilot in the fleet. He had 3 HR complaints against him for abrasive behavior in the last year alone, but the union kept protecting him. "My seat is 1A, Captain," Jordan said, her voice cool, devoid of emotion. "And my luggage fits perfectly in the overhead bin designated for 1A. Unless you're implying there's a different reason I shouldn't be sitting there. The cabin went quiet. The businessman in 2A lowered his newspaper. Douglas bristled. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone who looked like they should be serving him coffee, not flying in his premium cabin. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale coffee. "I am implying," Douglas said, lowering his voice to a menacing growl, "that I am the captain of this vessel, and I decide who is a security risk. Someone with an attitude blocking the boarding process fits that description." "I'm not blocking the process," Jordan countered, gesturing to the empty aisle behind her. "You are." Douglas's face tightened. His authority was being questioned in front of his crew and his high-value passengers. He couldn't let it slide. "Sit down," he snapped. "And if I hear one word from you during this flight, one peep, I will have you removed. Do you understand me?" Jordan held his gaze for a long, silent second. She was memorizing his face. She was mentally drafting the termination clause. "Loud and clear, Captain," she said. She moved past him, brushing his sleeve, and settled into seat 1A. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She simply pulled out her phone and sent a text message to a private number. Text to Gerald Finnegan, Chief of Operations. "Get me the personnel file on Captain Douglas Sterling, and have legal ready on the ground in London." She put the phone away as the "fasten seatbelt" sign dinged. She thought the worst was over. She thought he would go back to the cockpit and fly the plane. But Douglas Sterling wasn't done. He felt humiliated, and a man like Douglas Sterling didn't let humiliation sit. He needed a win, and 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, he would decide to manufacture a reason to get one. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing indigo. The A350 was cruising smoothly at Mach 0.85, leaving the east coast of the United States far behind. Inside first class, the air smelled of warmed truffle oil and vintage Bordeaux. Jordan had her tray table deployed, but not for the meal service she had been deliberately ignored for. While the businessman in 2A was enjoying his lobster thermidor, and the older couple in 3A and 3B were clinking champagne glasses, Jordan sat with a bottle of tepid water she had retrieved from her own bag. Veronica, the lead flight attendant, had swept past Jordan's suite 5 times, refilling glasses and fluffing pillows for everyone else, treating seat 1A like a dead zone. Jordan didn't care about the food. She cared about the spreadsheet on her laptop screen. It was a breakdown of Vista Airways' operational costs for the last quarter. Specifically, she was looking at the Executive Crew Compensation line items. She highlighted a row D sterling, flight pay, plus seniority bonus, plus per diem. The numbers were staggering, especially for a pilot whose performance reviews were riddled with red flags. "You're not supposed to be looking at that," a sharp voice cut through her concentration. Jordan looked up. Veronica was standing over her, a half-empty bottle of red wine in her hand. She was leaning in, peering uncomfortably close at Jordan's screen. "Excuse me," Jordan said, tilting her screen down slightly. "This is private work." "That looks like internal company documents," Veronica said, her voice raising just enough to be heard by the surrounding passengers. "Vista Airways proprietary data. How do you have access to that? Did you hack the in-flight Wi-Fi?" Jordan almost laughed. "Hack the Wi-Fi, Veronica. I'm reading a PDF." "I'm going to have to ask you to close the laptop," Veronica said, crossing her arms. "The captain doesn't like it when passengers are suspicious. And frankly, someone in a hoodie looking at airline schematics makes people nervous. I'm looking at a spreadsheet, Jordan corrected her patience fraying. And I am not closing my laptop. I have work to do before we land in London. Disobeying a crew member's instruction is a federal offense, Veronica recited, a smug smile playing on her lips. Don't make me get the captain. Please, Jordan said, returning her gaze to the screen. Get him. I have a few questions about his overtime hours anyway. Veronica gasped, affronted by the audacity. She spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. Jordan sighed and rubbed her temples. She knew she should just de-escalate, put the computer away, and fire them both from the comfort of the boardroom in London. But she was exhausted. She was grieving. And she was sick of being treated like a criminal in the company she literally owned. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Douglas Sterling emerged. He wasn't wearing his jacket now, just his white shirt with the epaulets and a dark tie. He looked flushed, his eyes tight with irritation. He had clearly been napping or eating when Veronica interrupted him with tales of the unruly girl in 1A. He didn't walk. He stomped. He stopped at the edge of Jordan's suite. He didn't speak immediately. He just loomed, using his height and the confined space to intimidate. Veronica tells me we have a problem, Douglas said. His voice was low, dangerous. Jordan didn't look up from her typing. Veronica has an imagination, Captain. I'm working. Is there a navigational issue I should be aware of? Or are you just stretching your legs? Douglas's hand shot out and slammed onto Jordan's tray table, rattling her laptop. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. The businessman in 2A jumped. The couple in row 3 stopped whispering. Look at me when I speak to you, Douglas hissed. You think because you scraped together enough miles for a ticket that you own the plane, I am the law up here. If I say your device is a security risk, it's a security risk. Jordan slowly took her hands off the keyboard. She turned her head and looked Douglas dead in the eye. Touch my property again, Captain, and you will regret it. Is that a threat? Douglas's voice rose. Did you just threaten the pilot in command? It's a statement of fact, Jordan said calmly. You are harassing a passenger. Go back to the flight deck and do your job. Douglas's face turned a shade of purple. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. He wasn't used to a young black woman looking at him with the cold, bored assessment of a judge. Give me the laptop, Douglas demanded, holding out his hand. I'm confiscating it for the duration of the flight. You can pick it up from airport security in London, if they decide to give it back. No, Jordan said. Give it to me. No! Douglas lunged. It happened in a blur of motion, but to Jordan, time seemed to slow down. Douglas reached over the tray table, his large hands grappling for the silver MacBook. Jordan, acting on instinct, grabbed the laptop with both hands and yanked it back against her chest to protect the data. Let go! Douglas shouted, losing all semblance of professional composure. He was tugging at the device, leaning fully into her personal space. Get off me! Jordan yelled back, her voice finally breaking its calm facade. Douglas, frustrated by her resistance and humiliated by the struggle, lost his grip on the laptop. His hand slipped. In his blind, red-hot rage, he didn't pull back. Instead, he swung. Crack! It wasn't a closed fist, but the back of his hand connected hard with Jordan's cheekbone. The force of the blow knocked her head back against the seat rest. Her glasses flew off her face, skittering across the aisle. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the first-class cabin. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. The drone of the engines seemed to vanish. Jordan sat frozen, Her cheek burned like fire. She tasted copper blood from a small cut on her lip. She slowly turned her head back to face him. Her eyes were watering from the impact, but her expression wasn't one of pain. It was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Douglas stood, panting, his hand hovering in the air. He looked at his hand, then at her. For a fleeting microsecond, fear flashed in his eyes. He realized he had just struck a passenger. But then the ego kicked in, the survival instinct of a narcissist. He couldn't be wrong. Therefore, she must have made him do it. "She attacked me," Douglas yelled, turning to the stunned passengers. "You saw it." She reached for the controls. "I had to subdue her. She was holding her laptop," the businessman in 2A shouted, standing up. He was a large man in a tailored suit, his face pale with horror. "You just hit a woman. You're insane." "Sit down," Douglas roared at the businessman, pointing a shaking finger. "Or I'll have you restrained too. This is a secure cockpit environment. She is a threat." Douglas turned back to Jordan, his face twisting into a sneer to cover his panic. "Veronica, get the restraints, now." Veronica, who had been watching from the galley with her hand over her mouth, snapped into action. She wasn't thinking. She was following orders. She grabbed the plastic flex cuffs from the emergency kit and ran over. "Captain." Maybe we should. Kenji, the first officer, had poked his head out of the cockpit, drawn by the shouting. His eyes went wide when he saw Jordan's swelling cheek. "Captain Sterling, what is going on?" "Get back on the stick, Kenji," Douglas barked. "I'm handling a security breach. We have a belligerent passenger who physically engaged the crew." "I didn't touch you," Jordan whispered. Her voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dumping into her system. She wiped the blood from her lip with her thumb. She looked at the blood. "Wrist out," Douglas ordered, grabbing her left arm. "You're going in cuffs." "Don't do this," Jordan said. "Douglas, listen to me. If you put those cuffs on me, there is no coming back. Think about your pension. Think about your career." "You don't get to talk about my career," Douglas screamed. He wrenched her arm forward. Veronica, trembling, looped the plastic tie around Jordan's delicate wrist and zipped it tight. Then the other. They bound her hands behind her back. "Seatbelt," Douglas ordered. Veronica buckled Jordan in tight effectively, immobilizing her. "You stay here." Douglas spat, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "And when we land, the London Metropolitan Police will be waiting to drag you to a cell. You'll be on the no-fly list for the rest of your miserable life." He straightened up, adjusted his tie, and looked around the cabin. The other passengers were staring at him with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Everything is under control," Douglas announced, trying to sound authoritative, but sounding merely manic. "We will be landing in 3 hours. Enjoy the rest of the flight." He turned and marched back into the cockpit, slamming the reinforced door behind him. Veronica scurried into the galley and pulled the curtain shut, hiding herself. Jordan sat alone in seat 1A. Her cheek was throbbing with a dull, heavy pulse. Her shoulders ached from the angle of her arms. She couldn't wipe the tears that were now leaking from her eyes, due to the pain. The businessman in 2A leaned forward. "Miss, are you okay? I recorded it. I have my phone. I recorded the audio." Jordan took a deep, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Keep it safe." She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She sat in the dark, bound like a prisoner in her own airplane. She let the pain sharpen her focus. Douglas thought he had won. He thought he had neutralized a threat. He had no idea that the plane was equipped with a satellite phone system that could be accessed via voice command from the first-class suite console, a feature Jordan had insisted on installing for high-value clients. She leaned her head toward the side panel. "Connect," she whispered to the automated system. "Priority line 1. Passcode Alpha Zulu 9 King." A soft tone beeped. "Connecting to—" "Chairman's office," the synthetic voice replied. It rang once. "Jordan." The voice on the other end was David Halloway, the CEO of Vista Airways, answering on his private line in the middle of the night. "Why are you calling from the air? Is everything okay?" Jordan licked her split lip. "David," she said, her voice like ice. "Wake up the board and call the airport authority in Heathrow. I want the police waiting at the gate, but not for me." The remaining 3 hours of Flight 882 were a study in suffocating tension. While Captain Douglas Sterling sat in the cockpit, drinking a fresh cup of coffee and joking with a terrified Kenji about teaching millennials some manners, the first-class cabin had transformed into a silent vigil. The businessman in 2A, whose name was Robert Henderson, a senior partner at a London law firm, had quietly asked Veronica for a straw so Jordan could sip water without moving her bound hands. When Veronica refused, sneering that prisoners don't get room service, Robert had stood up, walked to the galley, taken a bottle of water and a straw himself, and held it to Jordan's lips. "Thank you," Jordan whispered, her voice hoarse. The swelling on her left cheek had turned a violent shade of purple-black. Her lip was still oozing slightly. "I'm a lawyer," Robert whispered back, adjusting his glasses. "Corporate litigation. I've already drafted a witness statement on my phone, and I have the contact info for the couple in row 3. You're going to own this airline by the time we're done." Jordan managed a weak, crooked smile. "I already do." Robert looked at her confused. He thought she was delirious from the blow. He patted her shoulder gently and sat back down. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, the radio crackled to life. "Vista 882, this is London Centre." The controller's voice was clipped professional. "Descend and maintain flight level 200, speed 250. Vista 882 descending to 200, Kenji replied. "London requesting gate assignment." There was a pause, a long, static-filled sibilance that made the hairs on the back of Kenji's neck stand up. "Vista 882. The controller returned. "You are instructed to taxi to remote stand 44. Do not, I repeat, do not approach the terminal. You will be met by ground services and local authorities upon engine shutdown." Douglas laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Hear that, Kenji remote stand? That means the police want plenty of room to haul her off. They probably have a van waiting. I bet she has warrants." Kenji didn't laugh. He looked at the ACARS message that had just popped up on the flight management screen. It wasn't from air traffic control. It was a company message from Operations HQ, London. Message priority. "Do not depart cockpit upon arrival. Await CEO delegation." "Captain," Kenji said, his voice trembling, "why is the CEO's delegation meeting us?" Douglas waved a dismissive hand. "Standard procedure for a high-profile incident. Halloway probably wants to shake my hand for protecting the brand. I kept the cabin secure. That's what matters." Douglas believed his own lies because he had to. He adjusted his tie, checked his reflection in the darkened glass of the instruments, and prepared for his victory lap. He didn't know that 3,000 miles away, David Halloway was wide awake, watching the flight tracker on a giant screen. his face pale as a sheet, surrounded by a crisis management team that was currently shredding Douglas Sterling's employment contract. As the plane broke through the heavy grey clouds over London, Jordan stared out the window. She couldn't feel her hands anymore. The circulation had been cut off for hours. She focused on the wing she had approved the budget for. She focused on the engine, the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engine she had negotiated the service contract for. "This is my bird," she thought. "And you are just a guest in it." The wheels touched down with a heavy thud. The reverse thrusters roared. As the plane slowed and turned off the runway, the cabin crew made the standard announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Please remain seated." Veronica's voice wavered over the intercom. She had seen the view outside. As the plane taxied toward the remote stand, it wasn't just a police van waiting. It was a convoy. 4 black SUVs, 3 police cruisers with lights flashing, a staircase truck, and standing on the tarmac, huddled in trench coats against the drizzle, was a group of men who looked like they were waiting for a funeral. Douglas brought the plane to a halt. He set the parking brake. "Engines cut," he announced. "Let's get this over with." He stood up, put on his jacket, and donned his hat. He wanted to look the part. "Kenji, stay here," Douglas ordered. "I'll handle the authorities." Douglas opened the cockpit door. He stepped into the galley, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at Veronica. "Open the main door." Veronica hesitated. She looked pale. "Douglas, there are a lot of people out there. Open it." She disarmed the door and swung it open. The cold London air rushed in. Douglas stepped out onto the metal platform of the stairs, ready to wave to the police, ready to point out the culprit. But the first person up the stairs wasn't a police officer. It was a man in a navy blue suit, breathless, his face flushed with anger. It was Marcus Thorne, the regional director for Vista Airways Europe. "Captain Sterling," Marcus said, not offering his hand. "Step aside." "Marcus." Douglas smiled, confused. "Good to see you. I have the situation under control. The passenger is restrained in 1A. "I said, step aside," Marcus roared, pushing past the pilot. Douglas stumbled back, shocked. Behind Marcus came 4 officers from the Metropolitan Police, 2 in tactical vests. They didn't even look at Douglas. They stormed past him into the cabin. The first-class cabin was silent as the police swarmed in. "Where is she?" the lead officer asked. Robert Henderson, the businessman in 2A, pointed to the front seat. "She's there, and she's hurt." The officers rushed to seat 1A. They saw Jordan slumped slightly, her hands bound behind her back, her face swollen. "Jesus," one of the officers muttered. "Get those off her." "Now!" Douglas had followed them back into the cabin, confused and beginning to panic. "Wait. Officer, that woman is dangerous. She attacked me. I restrained her under the Tokyo Convention." "Statutes." The officer ignored him. He pulled out a pair of wire cutters and snipped the plastic cuffs. Jordan's arms fell forward. She groaned, the blood rushing back into her numb fingers, causing agonizing pins and needles. "Miss..." The officer knelt in front of her. "Are you able to stand?" "We have paramedics waiting." Jordan took a deep breath. She blinked, clearing her vision. She looked up. She didn't look at the officer. She looked past him directly at Captain Douglas Sterling. "I don't need a paramedic," Jordan said, her voice quiet but steady. "I need my phone." Veronica, who was cowering in the galley, slowly reached into the pocket of the seat back where she had stashed Jordan's phone. She handed it over with a trembling hand. Jordan took the phone. She didn't unlock it. She just held it like a weapon. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she locked her knees. She smoothed her hoodie. She ran a hand over her messy bun. She walked into the aisle. "Officer." Douglas tried again, his voice cracking. "Why are you releasing her?" "She's a security risk." "Captain Sterling," a voice boomed from the doorway. It wasn't Marcus Thorne this time. Walking onto the plane was David Holloway, the CEO of Vista Airways. He had flown in on a private jet that landed 30 minutes prior just to be here for this moment. Douglas's eyes went wide. "Mr. Holloway." "Sir, I didn't know you were in London." "Sir, I can explain. This passenger—" "Shut up," David said. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper of pure venom. David walked past Douglas as if he were a piece of furniture. He went straight to Jordan. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company stopped in front of the girl in the hoodie, and to the shock of the entire cabin, he bowed his head. "Jordan," David said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." Douglas blinked. He looked from David to Jordan. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to make sense of the image. Why was the CEO apologizing to an unruly passenger? "It's not your fault, David," Jordan said, touching her swollen cheek. "But we have a culture problem." "Clearly." She turned her gaze to Douglas. The pilot was shrinking the air, leaving his lungs. "Who?" Douglas stammered. "Who are you?" Jordan took a step closer to him. She was half a foot shorter than him, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. "You asked me if I knew who you were," Jordan said softly. "You said you were the law. You said you were the highest authority on this plane." She reached into her backpack, which Robert Henderson had helpfully placed on the seat, and pulled out a leather folio. She tossed it onto the seat. "My name is Jordan Banks. My grandfather was Elias Banks." Douglas's face went grey. Elias Banks, the founder, the legend. "I own 51% of the voting shares of Vista Airways," Jordan continued, her voice gaining strength. "I don't just pay your salary, Captain Sterling. I own the seat you sit in. I own the uniform on your back. I own the fuel in the wings." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. You're the Banks Trust," Douglas whispered. He felt like he was going to vomit. "I am," Jordan said. "And as the majority shareholder, I am personally accepting your resignation, effective immediately." "Resignation," Douglas choked out. "But I have tenure." The union won't touch you," Jordan said coldly. "Because you didn't just assault your boss, you assaulted a passenger, and that's a criminal offense." She nodded to the police officers. "Officer," Jordan said, "I'd like to press charges: assault, battery, false imprisonment, and interference with the duties of a corporate officer." "With pleasure, ma'am," the lead officer said. He turned to Douglas. "Douglas Sterling, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Douglas shouted, backing up. "You can't do this. I'm a captain. I have 30 years. It was a mistake. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Jordan asked, a sad, bitter smile crossing her face. "That's the problem, Douglas. You thought I was nobody, and you thought it was okay to hit a nobody. That is why you will never fly again." The police grabbed Douglas. He didn't go quietly this time. He struggled, shouting about his rights, about conspiracies, about how unfair it was. They dragged him down the aisle past the passengers, who were now holding up their phones, recording his walk of shame. As he was shoved out the door and down the stairs to the waiting police van, Jordan turned to the galley. Veronica was pressed against the beverage cart, sobbing. "And you," Jordan said. "I'm sorry," Veronica wailed. "He made me do it. I was scared." "You watched him hit me," Jordan said. "And then you tied me up. You're not a victim, Veronica. You're an accomplice." Jordan looked at David. "Take her badge," Jordan said. David Halloway stepped forward and held out his hand. "Badge. Now." Veronica, shaking uncontrollably, unpinned her wings and handed them over. "Get off my plane," Jordan whispered. As the crew was led away, Jordan finally let out a breath. She sank into seat 1A. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was rushing back. Robert Henderson, the lawyer, leaned across the aisle. "Ms. Banks," he said gently. "That was the most impressive board meeting I've ever seen." Jordan looked at him and laughed. It hurt her face, but she laughed. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "remind me to send you a bottle of that vintage Dom Perignon. You're the only person on this flight who remembered that being human is more important than being first class." The metal stairs of the Airbus A350 were wet with the London drizzle, but the heat radiating from the scene was palpable. As Jordan Banks stepped onto the tarmac, flanked by David Halloway and a phalanx of airport security, the world seemed to tilt. She wasn't just a passenger deplaning. She was the center of a gravity well that was pulling the entire airline industry into its orbit. The flashing lights of the police cruiser carrying Douglas Sterling were fading into the distance, a blur of blue against the grey concrete. But beyond the security cordon, chaos was waiting. News of the incident had leaked before the plane even touched down. The passengers in first class, specifically the tech-savvy couple in row 3, had live-streamed the police boarding the plane. By the time Jordan reached the bottom of the stairs, the perimeter fence of the remote stand was lined with telephoto lenses. The British tabloids were already running headlines: "AR Rage Pilot Arrested After Assaulting Billionaire Heiress." "Ms. Banks," David Halloway said, his voice tight. He held a large black umbrella over her, shielding her from the rain and the prying eyes. "We have a car waiting to take you directly to the Dorchester. Our PR team is drafting a statement. You don't need to speak to anyone." Jordan stopped walking. She looked at the convoy of black SUVs waiting for her. She looked at the distant press pack. She touched her cheek. It was throbbing, a deep, rhythmic reminder of the violence she had endured. The swelling had started to close her left eye. "No statement, David," Jordan said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the idling jet engines. "Excuse me," David asked, pausing. "No press releases written by committee. No regrettable incident jargon," Jordan said, turning to face the CEO. "I want a press conference. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., right here." "Here." David looked around at the wet tarmac. "Jordan, you're injured. You need rest. And legal counsel advises—" "I am the legal counsel," Jordan interrupted. "I want the conference in front of this plane. I want the logo visible. And I want the world to see my face exactly as it looks right now. Do not put me in a hotel room, David. Put me in the fight." David looked at the young woman in the hoodie. He had known her grandfather, Elias Banks, for 30 years. Elias was a shark, a man of iron will. Looking at Jordan, now bruised and battered, but standing tall in her sneakers, David realized the apple hadn't just fallen near the tree. It was the roots of the tree itself. "I'll arrange it." David nodded. The holding cell 5 miles away, in a cold, sterile holding cell at Heathrow Police Station, Captain Douglas Sterling was pacing. He had been stripped of his belt, his shoelaces and his tie. He sat on the hard wooden bench, his pristine white shirt now rumpled and stained with sweat. He wasn't afraid yet. He was furious. "This is a mistake," he muttered to the empty room. "A massive bureaucratic screw-up." When the heavy metal door finally clanked open, Douglas expected to see a senior officer apologizing. Instead, a weary-looking duty solicitor walked in carrying a plastic cup of lukewarm tea. "Where is my union rep?" Douglas demanded, not standing up. "I pay dues. I want the ALPA representative here now." The solicitor sat down and placed a file on the table. He didn't look at Douglas with sympathy. He looked at him with the detached pity one reserves for a terminal patient who doesn't know the diagnosis yet. "Mr. Sterling," the solicitor said, "the union has been contacted. They have declined to send a representative." Douglas froze. "What? That's impossible. It's a standard grievance procedure." "This isn't a grievance, Mr. Sterling. It's a criminal charge," the solicitor said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "And the union has issued a statement. They are suspending your membership pending an investigation. They cited conduct bringing disrepute to the profession. They've seen the video." "What video?" Douglas whispered. "The passenger in 2A, the solicitor said. "Mr. Henderson. He recorded the entire altercation. It's currently the #1 trending video on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. It has 20 million views." Douglas felt the blood drain from his face. He sank back onto the bench. "But she provoked me. She was a security threat." "The video shows her sitting down Mr. Sterling. It shows her hands on a laptop. And it shows you striking her with enough force to cause visible bodily harm. The Crown Prosecution Service is upgrading the charge to assault occasioning actual bodily harm, ABH. And given the setting a commercial aircraft, they are adding endangering the safety of an aircraft. That carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment, though realistically you're looking at 5 years. For the first time in his life, the captain of the ship had lost control of the vessel. He put his head in his hands. The silence of the cell was louder than any jet engine. The Purge. The next morning, the conference room at Vista Airways' London headquarters was deadly silent. The long mahogany table was occupied by the board of directors, all of whom looked like they were attending a wake. At the head of the table sat Jordan Banks. The bruising on her face had bloomed into a kaleidoscope of purple and yellow. Her lip was split. She hadn't covered it. She wore a simple black blazer over a white t-shirt. No jewelry. No power suit. The injury was her power. Standing at the other end of the room were Patricia, the check-in agent from JFK flown in overnight, and Veronica, the lead flight attendant. Both women were trembling. "We have reviewed the incident report." Jordan began, her voice steady. She didn't look at the papers in front of her. She looked directly at the two employees. "And we have reviewed the employment history of the crew involved." "Ms. Banks," Veronica wept, wringing her hands. "Please, I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids. Douglas, he's the captain. You know how it is. If you defy the captain, you get written up." I was scared. Jordan looked at Veronica. Her expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. "Fear is a valid reaction, Veronica," Jordan said softly. "But you didn't just freeze. You participated. You fetched the restraints. You tightened them. You mocked a passenger who was bleeding. That isn't fear. That is complicity." Jordan turned her gaze to Patricia. "And you. You tried to deny me a seat I paid for, because I didn't look the part. You profiled me. You delayed me. You treated me with contempt before I even opened my mouth. I was just following protocol for fraud prevention. Patricia squeaked, her face blotchy. No, Jordan said. You were following your own bias, and that bias is a cancer in this company. Jordan stood up. Effective immediately, your contracts are terminated for gross misconduct. There will be no severance. There will be no references. Security will escort you out. As the two sobbing women were led away, the room remained silent. Jordan turned to the board. This doesn't end with them, she said, leaning her hands on the table. Douglas Sterling had 3 prior HR complaints for aggression. 3, and every time they were buried. Why? Because he was a senior cap. Because he had good stick and rudder skills. She pulled a file from her stack and threw it into the center of the table. I am initiating an independent audit of our entire HR department. Every complaint filed by a passenger or crew member in the last 5 years will be reopened. If I find that we have protected abusers to save face, the executives responsible will follow Douglas Sterling out the door. Is that clear? The board members nodded in unison. They were terrified. They realized that for years they had been answering to a silent partner. Now the partner was speaking, and she was roaring. The trial. The trial of R. vs. Sterling took place 4 months later at Isleworth Crown Court. It was the media event of the year. Douglas Sterling arrived in a suit that looked 2 sizes too big for him. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and grey. He walked with a stoop, avoiding the cameras. His defense attorney, a high-priced barrister paid for by the last of Douglas's savings, tried to paint a picture of a stressed pilot dealing with a belligerent, non-compliant passenger in a post-9/11 world. The cockpit is a sanctuary, the barrister argued. Captain Sterling perceived a threat to the flight controls. He acted on instinct to protect the lives of 300 souls. Then the prosecution called their star witness. Jordan Banks took the stand. She walked with the grace of a queen. The bruising was gone, but the memory was sharp. She recounted the events with clinical precision. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just told the truth. But the nail in the coffin wasn't Jordan's testimony. It was the video. The courtroom lights were dimmed. The large screens on the wall flickered to life. The audio played first, the condescending tone of Douglas, the calm refusal of Jordan. Then the image of the strike. Crack! The sound echoed as the silent courtroom. The jury, 12 ordinary men and women, winced in unison. They saw the shock on Jordan's face. They saw the arrogance on Douglas's. They saw him order the restraints. When the lights came back on, Douglas Sterling refused to look at the jury. He knew. The verdict took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with steel-rimmed glasses, peered down at Douglas over her bench. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. "You were entrusted with a position of immense responsibility. You were the commander of an aircraft. Instead of acting as a guardian, you acted as a tyrant. You assaulted a young woman because her defiance wounded your ego. You then compounded this crime by imprisoning her and attempting to destroy her reputation to save your own." The judge paused. "The aviation industry relies on trust. You have shattered that trust. I sentence you to 18 months in prison. Furthermore, I am forwarding a recommendation to the Civil Aviation Authority that you be permanently disqualified from holding a pilot's license." The gavel banged. Douglas didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. As the bailiffs cuffed him, real metal cuffs this time, not plastic zip ties. He looked across the courtroom. He locked eyes with Jordan Banks in the gallery. He expected to see triumph. He expected to see a gloating smile. But Jordan just looked at him with a blank, pitiless expression. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched him disappear into the holding cells. Then she picked up her bag and walked out into the sunlight, the new era, 1 year later. The winter snow was falling softly outside JFK's Terminal 4. The holiday rush was in full swing. Jordan Banks walked up to the Vista Airways counter. She was wearing a heavy wool coat and a scarf, but underneath she still wore her favorite hoodie. The check-in area had changed. The harsh fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by softer, warmer LED fixtures. But the biggest change was the staff. The young woman behind the counter smiled as Jordan approached. She wasn't looking down at her phone. She was looking at the passengers. "Good morning," the agent said brightly. "Heading to London today." "I am," Jordan said. "May I see your passport?" Jordan handed it over. The agent scanned it. The screen flashed the VIP status. But the agent didn't panic. She didn't stammer. "Welcome back, Ms. Banks," the agent said professionally. "We have your usual suite 1A, and Captain Miller asked me to let you know that the flight time is a swift 6 hours and 20 minutes. He also said the catering loaded the specific sparkling water you like." Jordan smiled. "Thank you. That's refreshing." "We've had a lot of training updates this year," the agent said, handing back the boarding pass. "The Banks protocol. It really focuses on passenger experience. It's made the job a lot better, honestly. People are happier." "I'm glad to hear that," Jordan said. She took her ticket and headed for the lounge. As she walked through the terminal, she passed a newsstand. On the cover of Aviation Weekly was a photo of the new Vista Airways CEO, a woman named Eleanor Ruiz, whom Jordan had personally headhunted to replace the retired and gently pushed out management team. Jordan boarded the plane. She turned left. In seat 2A sat a familiar figure, Robert Henderson, the lawyer. He was sipping a glass of champagne and reading a legal brief. When he saw Jordan, his face lit up. "Jordan," he exclaimed, standing up to shake her hand. "I wasn't sure if you'd be on this flight." "I wouldn't miss it, Robert," Jordan said, gripping his hand warmly. "How is the global key treating you?" "It's dangerous," Robert laughed, patting his stomach. "I've gained 5 pounds from the warm cookies, but seriously, thank you. You didn't have to do that." "You stood up when everyone else sat down," Jordan said, her voice serious. "You have no idea what that meant to me. In that moment, I wasn't a billionaire. I was just a girl in trouble. And you helped." She sat down in 1A. She buckled her seatbelt. As the plane taxied out, Jordan looked out the window. She thought about Douglas Sterling. She had heard through the grapevine that he was out on parole, working as a dispatch manager for a trucking company in Slough. Grounded, earthbound. The engines roared the deep, powerful thrum of the Rolls-Royce power plants. The plane surged forward, pressing Jordan into her seat. They lifted off. The ground fell away. The cars, the buildings, the people, they all became small, insignificant specks. Jordan watched the clouds rush by. She opened her laptop. She had a merger to finalize in Tokyo and a charity initiative to launch in Kenya. She was the silent backer no more. She was the pilot of her own destiny now. She adjusted her hoodie, put on her noise-cancelling headphones, and for the first time in a year, she fell into a deep, peaceful sleep at 35,000 feet. That is the story of how one man's ego wrote a check his career couldn't cash. It's a brutal reminder that you never truly know who you're talking to. Status isn't written on a forehead, and power doesn't always wear a suit. Captain Sterling learned the hard way that dignity is a two-way street, and when you try to run someone off the road, you might just crash yourself. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice and instant karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more stories about arrogant people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you have done if you were sitting in seat 2A? Would you have recorded it like Robert, or would you have intervened? Let me know in the comments below. Stay humble, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.